Okay, this one's called Man Maketh the Bitch. Since being in V2K, I've certainly learned a lot about the male piss-taking mindset, psyche, along with the terrible relationships I had earlier on in my mid-youth, which was like very connected with narcissism. God is bringing my attention now to the homosexual mindset. As I've mentioned earlier in some videos, when men are gathered together in a brotherhood, strange things can happen, especially in that of religions, boarding schools, Freemasons and satanic circles and so on. In my lifetime, because of the absence of man in my household, like my mother and her mother, we have had to be as tough as men to get on with life. This means emotionally and physically, and also, like men in the vicinity, you see you as like women on your own and like want to take advantage, such as cuckooing or stuff like that in later years. When I used to dress feminine when I was younger, about 14, when I was more innocent and was under my mother's watch, I would feel vulnerable, as I was considered a blonde and dumb by middle-aged men, and they would do the glad eye at me like he was a bit of eye candy to lust after, and it was assumed that I didn't have any intelligence between my ears. These were men from a previous generation of a Christian country that believed in good values, and then a generation that was given sexual freedom in the 1960s. So, like it's almost like they had the strength of like the chastity of the earlier men that would believe in like courtship and stuff like that. But, then they had their newfound freedom, and it reflected in their attitude that they were starting to lose respect for women, because whatever, they attained was kind of more easier due to that sexual so-called liberation of the 60s. So you were part of a system that was breaking down towards respectful standards of the past, where courtship and chivalry were standard, in men. When I started noticing that I was getting spat on in the streets by men, particularly of like multicultural races, then all the subsequent narcissism behaviour during courtships, and the multiple heartbreaks, then I started toughening up and started to realise that men wasn't worth the hassle. I've been now on my own quite a long time, because they wouldn't take responsibility for their actions. They had become entitled, in a sense, to abuse me as a woman and walk away laughing once they got what I wanted. As I say, like, I think I've been on forums and like men started blaming me, like for opening your legs and stuff like that. And all I was doing was just trying to find out, why men are kind of commonplace in thinking the way they do. Not all men, but I mean it's a mass majority of them, And society enabled this to the full, where men got very little comeback for their actions, where women had to carry the burden of bringing up families on their own, with work elderly parents to look after their kids, kids with disabilities, looking after home, DIY and every other job, that parents should do as a couple. So that includes me as well. And most women that I know are in this position. Many are single mothers, and like that does affect the sons, because they need the strength of a father to keep them in check. I'm not saying that all men are bad from single parents, but they do need that, because like it makes them softer men, and then consequently they still don't pick up the gauntlet to do the right thing, because they're a little bit lost. Like they need that toughening mentality that a woman can't supply, unless like she's in brutal times, which I think we're heading into. As I've mentioned before, all these things that a normal woman would do in a natural femininity, such as look after a home of children, has been demonised over the years through TV, as I've mentioned in earlier videos, you know, like old programmes of the 70s, you know, like mother-in-law jokes and that, although some of it's quite funny. But, you know, like, you know, women have been constantly on, like, to be picked on for quite a long time, you know, like it's uncool to be like a housewife or anything like that, you know, you've got to do it all. You know, like, and a lot of these women, you know, are doted on that actually broadcast this rubbish, or they're hostages in this situation and think they're free, but they're not. They're actually being manipulated by men, you know, such as Madonna, you know, like kind of used her sexuality as her liberation, but not really, because like she's still, you know, like being used by men, you know, like she's still locked in a system, you know, like. And like in some ways it's done a lot of damage, you know, like this pretending to think that women are stronger, but they're not physically stronger, you know, like as I'm going to mention in the next paragraphs, you know, like we are coming into a brutal time if it's not corrected. Something's just fell off. Yeah, and anyway, as I said before, you know, these women who do the natural femininity, who, you know, like, and, you know, like, look after the children and the home, have been put down, and the Jezebel has taken a place of, like, being put on a throne with men. What I mean by Jezebel, you know, like, it's like somebody who's, like, considered cheap by men, who are generally ashamed to be with her because she fornicates with everyone, you know, but like these women are usually put over like good, wholesome women that, you know, homemakers and stuff like that, that don't wear, you know, stupid amounts of makeup and don't show all their breasts and stuff like that, who are decent, you know, what God would consider a daughter, you know, like doesn't mean that they have to be boring, but you know, it just means that she takes care of herself and like isn't open to all hours, if you know what I mean. And we're going on about like the Jezebel is a mirror image of a man in all his demonic glory. In the Bible it says the women are a mirror image of mankind, or their men, which reflects in his glory, will reflect on women. So like, because men have fallen, like women are literally turned into bitches, you know, like because they have to cope with men's bullshit, you know, like that. And you know, they've you know, become harder because like men won't pick up their responsibilities. They're trying to mess with my speech in V2K. As in Corinthians 11.7, where it goes on about divine order, you know, like men are subject to God, and women, you know, reflecting men's glory, you know, like their environment, the way they look after them, you know, like the way they look, you know, like a lot of these men who are into Jezebels compare you to a Jezebel who likes, you know, laps in their own vanity all day, you know, like where real women have to get on with life, you know, they have to look after the children, and they're usually last on the back burner. That's probably where the men come in, you know, like in a household, that men look after their wives, that look after their children together, you know, so, you know, they've got no one there who's a backup who can give them a rest. You know, they can buy, you know, stuff that makes them feel good, that can be spoilt, you know, that can have like an arm round them at the end of the day, you know, stuff like that. So these Jezebels have got getting all the priority over their minds, because they're, you know, they say that these Jezebels, you know, blow them off good or whatever, you know, but God's saying to me that they're not even experiencing love, you know, in its true, correct way. You know, he's done some demonstrations which I've put on my channel, you know, like that's why they go from one woman to the next, because they're not satisfied properly in the first place. And a lot of these women that are at the top of the demonic stakes are usually like sexual deniers anyway, that they'll tease, you know, and they like the power of that, you know, it makes them feel good. But as I say, you know, like I believe that it's very closely related to Cain, and they don't know how to do it in the proper sense anyway. And it doesn't have to be like Christian cardigan level, you know, like you know, like there's no finesse or no wonderment to it. It's a load of rubbish. I mean, like, God's only just teaching me now, you know, what's missing, and that's, you know, like love. If you're like both in the same mutual mindedness, you know, like especially if you've got the crown of God on, you know, like that. It's quite mind blowing, this love, and I have actually felt it in V2K. You know, like with Tom York, you know, like, but he's going the way of defending Jezebels. I don't know if it's because it's a weakness in himself, but like God has actually demonstrated it. Like one, you know, like a flower with water pouring out into the other, you know, like it's like a feeling that's out of this world. So, you know, like when you're in the same mindset and the same kind of bloodline, because he's going on about bloodlines at the moment, and you know, like they tick all your what's to say, like tick all your boxes, let's put it that way. You know, they know if you've like settled with these tribes and stuff in the past within your bloodline, they know, you know, your likes and dislikes of everything, you know, and you get on with them. So anyway, it's hard to explain, but I think it's a lot better than a fleshy kind of love. It kind of makes me feel sick now, but and it's not based, you know, like impurity. I mean, he's taking me through this, you know, and I fell because of, you know, permissive society is what my mum would say, you know, like, and he's taking me where I'm at, cleaning up the act, but not in a way that we would do it, you know, like in a natural. It's like some information has been hidden from us, you know, as like nations. That, you know, I think that maybe demonic Jews might have a lot to do with that, but we'll see. As I was saying, going back to the divine order, being subject to God, and women reflecting God's glory and men reflecting, no, that's now, women reflecting men's glory and men reflecting God's glory in the natural order of things. Men have become vain. They use their natural stance as top of their tree now to abuse because they have lost their way in God. As I say, you know, like men can be dangerous. You know, they've got the natural divine order, but they use it. If they use it in a bad way, it's devastating. Trans men, God has shown me that in Freemasonry that it is a ritualistic mocking ritual that they dress up and look like women and Mickey take out of what they perceive as a woman. But God is still working with me on this, which has nothing to do with what a real woman is. Then Satan just smirked at me. This is when I was writing it earlier. Again, he pulled the jumper over their eyes with his gotcha. As Satan has said, once you lose sight of God, you're in his playground for him to mess about in. You know, like he's like a shark. When you lose sight of God, then, you know, he takes over and kind of takes care of your soul in a bad way. Yeah, so, you know, like, so you'll be glad enough to get back to God, and, like, you know, I think that it's a bit of a joke between them, to be honest, God and Satan. You know, like, I think that God has had to heal to him, and this is how they've worked it out. But I can see real love between God and Satan. It's not because of what Satan does, it's because of what God does. A real woman in her feminine natural state is nurturing, caring, soft, and emotional support for her husband. It doesn't lie in looks. You know, although, like, there are many examples in the Bible that, you know, like, these men fell, you know, like, for women, you know, that were beautiful. But I think that it even says, like, that even Joseph with Mary, it was based in a kind of fleshy onlook, but we can't help it because, like, of, you know, the original sin kind of thing. Caring, soft and support for her husband, a helper for her husband, someone with strength for her husband to lean on, a woman who clothes her family in scarlet, you know, Christ's blood. So it's more of an internal and external femininity, because obviously women look different, they're made different, you know, like, but, you know, like whether she's fat or thin, you know, like, or disabled or not, she's still a woman, you know, like, and still has those attributes. You kind of have like a male brain who thinks in a male way, and you've got a female brain that thinks in a female one. Can you fetch it, low? Because I'm doing a video. Christ, bud. Whereas the bitch, the reflection of men that has gone bad, or maybe even Cain's bloodline, is not necessarily a woman, but someone who wears makeup, butchers up the body to accommodate an exaggerated view of a woman who has always been available for sex to be used by anyone, consciously or unconsciously. They have a highly sexual lilt to their clothing. They have a vicious mouths, and that put down everyone, especially women. It's okay, they're tripping my head again in V2K. Especially women, real ones, to degrade them by calling them whores when they are not. An automatic assumption that isn't true most of the time. When men dress up like women, it is a ritualistic, mocking ritual, whether they are aware of it or not. These men snake their way into affections, then obliterate them. This is like whether they dress up as women or men. Then move on to the next victims without care. God's gone on about, like, you know, they're operating in God's wrath. You know, when they do things that are wrong, like hurting people and that, you know, like, they're literally burnt spiritually. So this is why they get more spiteful, because there's more of them being burnt. I mean, it might be the sin that's actually being burnt at the same time. Who knows, you know, but then they kind of lose their sense of self, you know, like their sense of morality, you know, like when they keep going on and on and on. And God says that, you know, it's based in self-loathing, a lot of this stuff. Men, especially in numbers, are frightening, especially in the same mindset without godly mindedness. They will use their power mindlessly and cause maximum damage. See Epstein files for details. I mean, if you see any of those pictures, they're horrific, you know, like, as I say, like, a lot of the men in V2K are a type, you know, that are very fleshy, and they're like, got this bloodline mindset of cruelty and stuff like that. But God can release these people if they don't have to, like, fall down, like, in thousands of apologies. But, you know, like, once it hits, you know, like, the information that God gives, that's when, like, you reverence, or what is it they say, that you start repenting, because, like, then, like, the coins dropped in your brain, you know, like, a lot of the stuff that we know in religion and stuff, like, is based particularly with Catholicism around, like, a punishment mindset, but, you know, that was used as, like, some sort of financial tool anyway. You know, the real God operates in forgiveness anyway, and he's quite kind, and he's still being kind to those that are still learning, because he knows them better than anyone, and it's like, poor us, the ones that are already saved, you know, like, they're really getting a good crunching. You know, I was moaning this morning, and he says, you're all right, you're already saved, you know, I'm still looking out for you, but I'm still, like, operating, you know, like, I'm still in pain with these people who are still learning, you know, like, because they're punishing me, messing things up, you know, and stuff like that. Where he says it will be worth it in the end once it's done, because they could be gone forever. Well, you know, like, they're still operating in, like, that wrath. I'm still working with God on the finer details as to why men even do this when the truth is plain in front of them. As I say, you know, like, I've gone rattled on till I'm blue, and, like, God's showing them examples and they're still hurting. Also, with the prospect in the current climate of unwelcome visitors into our country that have started taking over our cities, where are us women to go next? Just like in the Netflix series Vikings and the Last Kingdom, rape could become a daily occurrence to deal with as women, and it's either you pick up the sword or die. There is a misconception that British women will take it lying down. Women who are already being made harder in these times because of men. And it's in quite a short time span as well, that have pushed it aside and not addressed, like the obvious, like the discrepancies in what the governments are doing and stuff like that, and they're not picking up the sword and actually, well, they don't have to do it, like even their mouths, under God's counsel, like to call out these guys. It probably would have got pushed back a long time ago. Women have already been made harder in these times, and thank God for it, in some ways, because like I don't think a lot of them are, a lot of us are going to take this line down if it gets more traction, with certain people of other religions that are extreme. And we are not animals to be toyed with by incoming religions that only occupy or copy badly the truth that leads back to the God of Moses, as in the Bible and the Torah. And this, I'm having a go at, Muslim mindsets like that, because like over the past 2 or 3 years and beyond, I've had a lot of flashpoints with Muslims, who kind of assume that you're stupid, like because of their bad mindset that's been put on them to view us with. They think that they're coming to this country and they'll automatically get it, but from God's point of view, this country was fought on the sword, Christian mindedness, and like he says that it's going to finish that way if it goes that extreme. That's why it's showing these people now where they're going wrong, like everything's under his subjectivity at the moment, religion, the Jews, Christianity, men's mindsets, like where women have gone, Jezebels and stuff, good Christian family values, like the way they're trying to depopulate us as well. Not Muslims, but but they could be part of that if it's proven. And getting things back into its natural order, and the obliteration of useless religion, such as like all the frills of Catholicism. It needs to be pulled back into worshipping him the way he is, not like through walls and petitions and cloth and stuff like that. These are like filters that are getting in the way. As I say, like William Tyndale and others have fought for us to have a personal relationship with God and not have these middlemen, gangsters, getting in the way, that are using guilt and bending the real intention of God's word. I think that's it. I mentioned before, go through children, yeah, there's love. Hold on. Yeah, I've gone on about by kings. So we hope that men will take up their godly position by natural divine right, and move into his mindset, and like put the armour of God on. I can't actually see where, I haven't put like the verse for that, but he goes on about the breastplate of righteousness. That Bible I was showing yesterday is like the book of life, it's the way to get free of situations, riddle free out the snake's clasp. So don't go the devil's way, because he'll just have a field day with you, or Satan's way, or what I call him is Lucy-tan, because like he's kind of nice in some ways as long as you're through God. But if you're kind of using him as your saviour, then you're going to go bad routes. But God's always there on the horizon. So if you are in a bad place, make sure you start looking towards him, because Lucy-tan will have a right riot with you. Okay, see ya.